Well, tonight we're going to go into lesson 13, the last one on our overcoming anxiety. And I'm really excited about tonight's program. We're going to be talking about emotional relearning. In the year-long class that we do, we'll be getting into it a lot more. But we're going to be talking about transforming our mind through emotional relearning. And so I'm excited about that tonight. First, though, before we start, you can get your notes. If you're watching online, you don't have the notes, you can write me, Ron, at empowerministry.org. That's Ron at empowerministry.org, and I'll be happy to send them to you. Let's start by looking at what we've learned so far. I thought maybe a little review, and if you don't have the notes from those, you can write me. I have it in kind of a book form now, and I can just send you one file, and you can get all the notes from the previous 13 weeks. But we talked about God that knows about your anxiety and he wants to help. He's for you. He's not against you, all right? God is for you, and he knows who you are. He knows what you're going through. And then we talked about anxiety comes in different forms. We talked about worry and fear and the different kinds of anxieties. And then we examined the brain. We talked somewhat about the brain and how the nervous system works and how, anxiety gets started in the brain and how it works with the limbic system and that. And then we shared the good news that the brain is a learning machine, and so we've learned its associations. And a lot of our anxiety comes from things we believe, and we associate it with something that makes us fearful, and so we have anxiety. But the good news is we also talked about the relearning brain, the plasticity of the brain. What got us to the place we are in the first place is the fact that the brain wires itself, right? What can get us out of it is that it can rewire. And we can extinguish old pathways and create new ones. And so it's a really exciting concept. And we talked about worry thoughts and how to change them. And a lot of what we talked about and a lot of what's taught today is, what we think, how we think affects our anxiety. And so are we thinking right? And so we wanted to treat that topic, and we thought it was real important. We examined some of the different beliefs that we can have. And the question we'll be talking about tonight is what are we believing about ourselves? And we're going to look somewhat for the Genesis beliefs, if you will. Where did it start? Where we can go back and change, maybe right in the early on when we were younger and we didn't know better and we assumed something. And if we can correct it, a lot of times it has what's a domino effect. And it can change a lot of the ways we're thinking. And so we talked about, we did some self-examination, if you remember. We looked at it, we had a lot of little surveys that we could do and ask ourselves, am I believing this? And then we learned about belief exchange, how we can learn new healthy truths to combat the damaging lies that we believe about ourselves and about life, and sometimes even about others. If you feel that other people are against you all the time, well, then that's going to affect the way you feel too, right? That would certainly make you anxious. So it isn't just what we believe about ourselves. A lot of times it's what we believe about others or life. If you're pessimistic about life, that certainly doesn't help anxiety, right? And so optimism is something we need to try to learn as well. And as Christians, we should be optimistic, The Lord has a plan for our life, and we should be optimistic about it. And so then we examined different ways to regulate our emotions. We did it kind of in a hurry in the year-long class. We'll take a lot of time to do this. It's an important part of what we teach. Regulating emotions is important. We talked about posture and breathing and relaxation and some of the different things there. We want to go from being reactive to being receptive, and then we want to be reflective. We want to think, right? We'll allow that prefrontal cortex to come online. And so then, number 9, we shared how we can replace negative self-talk with God talk. That was probably one of my favorite ones, where we talk about how can the Lord help us? What does the Lord want us to know? What truths are there that he can help contradict some of the beliefs that we're thinking? And how do we communicate with him? And then finally, we can stop the lies behind the anxiety and emotionally relearn the truth, and that's kind of where we're going to finish tonight. Now, why emotional relearning? The Bible teaches that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. In the last 30 years, neuroscience has learned how the brain and memory work hand in hand in shaping behavior. Emotional relearning uses biblical principles then and applied neuroscience to help us learn to regulate our emotions. Science teaches that many of us don't have the resilience to return to peace and joy and from painful emotions. Instead, we struggle with the ability to regulate our painful emotions. And when that happens, we turn to substitutes for comfort. We get all anxious and worked up, and we have negative behaviors and do things that we shouldn't just to, escape from a lot of the things that are happening. And so we want to work with the brain as well as the Holy Spirit and the Spirit and God to really learn the truth about ourselves. And so we have 4 phases that emotional relearning is part of, and 3 of them are up here. The first is emotional recognition, and we'll teach more of that in a larger class, but we want to be able to recognize when we're being tripped, when we're being triggered, when we're starting to get anxious. We want to learn it, and we can do that. We can feel it in our body. We can feel it starting to happen, and so we want to start heading it off before we get into a full-blown anxiety episode. And so we want to know, boy, I got this headache. I wonder what's going on. Or, man, I just feel out of sorts. And so we want to start recognizing when things are happening. And then we want to be able to regulate it. Now, this is where a lot of science works, and that is regulating it. And regulation is good, but in a sense, it's a form of coping. We're coping with it. We're learning how to cope. We're feeling anxious. We breathe and we calm down. And that's great. I'm all for that. We want to be able to calm down. And if that does it, that's fine. And in some cases, that might be all we need. But if it's happening all the time, then the purpose of regulation should be a little different. Not just to cope, but what we want to do is to be able to bring our brain online. You see, when we're all up here, when we're all anxious, we can't think. We're shut off the prefrontal cortex. We're not in our rational brain. We're in the limbic part of our brain. And what we want to be able to do is recognize them when they're happening, breathe, calm down, and then we're able to think and process, right? And now we can maybe figure out what's happening. Even if we can't do it in the moment, we can acknowledge what's happening and maybe write down a little note where we can come back to it later. But what we want to start getting good at is starting to learn, what are we thinking, what's causing this, and then we want to be able to relearn what the truth is. I can tell you already that a lot of the things that bother us, a lot of the things that bother us and make us anxious aren't true. I mean, it's like worry. 90% of what we worry about will never happen. And frankly, in my early days of anxiety, and I had anxiety for many, many decades, there in my 20s and 30s for sure, and in my teenage years, I remember hearing that statement, 90% of what you worry about will never happen. But I heard it enough that I started to believe that. And it brought me some comfort, and it allowed me to exercise faith then. It allowed me to stop enough to exercise faith and say, Lord, I commit this to you. I can't tell you how many times I walked through my anxiety holding the Lord's hands. The Lord got me through a lot of that by putting my faith in Him. But I had to stop, realize what's going on, exercise not only the fact that, hey, I'm worrying and there's nothing to worry about, also say, okay, Lord, I'm going to trust you. And I'm going to not worry about this. And what I did, one technique I did was I had like a little worry box in my mind, right? And so I would say, okay, and I would write it down on this big chalkboard in my mind. It wasn't a box, it was a chalkboard. And I would write down what I worry. And I made a promise to the Lord, and I don't take promises to the Lord lightly. I said, Lord, if this is still important come Monday, I'll address it. But right now, I just can't think about it. I commit it to you. And you know what? Monday, it never came up. It never came up. But I was able, because I knew I would be honest enough with myself that I would come back to it. I treated myself like I would someone else, right? If it was that serious, I would certainly help someone else. Well, why not myself? But what I found is by being able to trust the Lord, have faith, put it away, designate a time, it was able to help me relax, move on, and never happened. The worry was never there on Monday. It was taken care of. It was just an anxiety attack, you might say, right? So regulation's important, and the third one is this relearning, and that's where we try to return as close as possible to the genesis of where this came from. Now, that we can't always get there, and it's not always that important that we get to the actual one, but it helps sometimes if we're in our 40s or 30s or 50s. If this has been long-standing, it might help to get at least back to our adolescence, or maybe when we were 11 or 12. I find that a lot of this stuff is in that 10 to 12 years old, maybe 8 to 10, because we move from an emotional brain to a social brain, and a lot of that stuff starts happening back then. And a lot of times we can get back to episodes that happened, things that were said, things that were done, that maybe don't have that big of a significance when you look at it in the scope of things, but it created a thought in our head. And a thought that, you know, I'm damaged goods, nobody likes me, I'm not, you know, I'm worthless, I'm not lovable, things like that, that we don't necessarily put words on, but they're concepts in our brain, and they have affect to it. You know, when you're walking around like this, you don't necessarily have to have words on that. There's a lot of ways to describe this, but they all kind of say the same thing. Something's wrong with me. You know, I'm not sitting there, you know, something's wrong. You know, I'm thinking, so the body posture, all that. And so it's not so important that we get the exact words all the time, but if we can get back to a time where we've experienced that, then we can correct it. And I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that in a minute, okay? And so that's where we're going to be talking about tonight. We want to change some of our memories, because changing our memories can change our life. And it's important. Much scientific proof for changing the interpretation of memories has come into place since I started this program 15 years ago. It's been an exciting time in history of psychology. You can see here under Change Your Memories, Change Your Life, I want to read Rethinking Trauma Treatment, Attachment, Memory Reconsolidation, and Resilience. It's quite a title, but by Courtney Armstrong. And this is what she writes. And it's exciting to me because it kind of verifies, and it's another person's opinion, but it's very similar to what we're doing here. Trauma, she says, is a disorder of what? The memory. The memory. You may be thinking, okay, I understand why an emotional brain might want to suppress the thinking brain during a life-threatening event, but why does it seem to keep doing this after the event is over and cause us to overreact to things that aren't actually life-threatening? It has to do with the way the brain forms implicit and explicit. Now, we've used those words in here before. Implicits are memories that are out of our awareness. One form of an implicit memory would be a procedural memory. When you go to drive a car, you know, I have a Mustang out there, it still has a key, right? So I don't think twice, because all my life I've used a key, right? I just sit in there, put it in, and start up. It's a procedural memory. It's kind of almost out of my awareness. I go to my wife's car, she's got a push button, and I'm trying to figure out where the key goes in, all right? That's not quite procedural yet, you know. But on a lot of things, riding a bike would be a good example of that. That's a form of implicit. What we're talking about here is that when trauma happens, cortisol pumps through the body, shuts off the normal kind of memory work, and what happens, the amygdala and the limbic part of the brain starts looking for the things it needs to remember. It's your guard shack. So what's it remember? The tone of voice, you know, when someone talks like this, right? The look on the face, you know, if I start going like this, you know, body proximity, right? Body language. It remembers certain words, you know. It can remember different sensations, right? Maybe the smell of alcohol in the breath, right? And so later, colors, all kinds of things, what the person was wearing. So later, when something happens and there's similar triggers there, might be the tone of voice, might be the expression on the face, might be certain key words, it might be a certain thing they wore, boom, I'm off and running, okay? Now what happens, I found, is that I need less and less proof after a while. The brain starts assuming even earlier with less and less proof. It prunes it out, and so now if someone just starts to do it, look, I'm already starting to react, you see. I don't even wait to see if it's the same look, you know, and that's how the brain is. And so we get triggered a little easier, and that comes from these implicit memories, okay? We're not remembering necessarily that event a long time ago. We're reacting in the here and now to something that was really put in our brain years ago, okay? An explicit memory says, oh, I remember my 12th birthday. I got a pony, or whatever, you know, so I remember, yeah, I didn't get a pony, okay, so anyways, but you know, I remember that. That's an implicit memory. An explicit says, doesn't remember it, but I'm reacting to it. Does that make sense? Okay? And that's an interesting phenomena. I tell you, for years, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was going on. It's your subconscious mind. You ever hear that one? Well, what in the heck? I used to say, Lord, take my subconscious mind. Do whatever you got to do, because I didn't know what to do. And of course, being a pastor and things like that, there was always the demon discussion, right? And that really scared me, you know. And I'm waiting for that one, you know. And And of course, I'm praying, and I thank God for Neil Anderson, you know, who just wrote some great stuff on it, and I've exercised the armor of God in that. I'm not belittling that, but I mean, it was to the extreme. When I started finding out that there's such a thing as implicit memories, all this stuff started making so much sense. And that, because I couldn't figure it out, and when you can start really seeing what you're believing, you can really start making some changes, and that's exciting. And so, let me continue what she's reading. It says here, she says it has to do with the way, I'm in the first paragraph, middle of it, the way the brain forms implicit and explicit memories. During emotionally stressful encounters, the amygdala encodes all the sensory information, that's what we were saying, associated with the event into what is called an implicit memory. Implicit memory is a network of neurons that contain the felt, experiential part of a memory and has four components: emotional, perceptual, you know, what I'm believing, physical, and procedural, what I'm going to do when it happens, right? Together, these four components of implicit memory make up a mental model or schema in our emotional brain. Anytime our amygdala detects anything similar to the original traumatic event, it is primed to activate this encoded programming instantly. Under less extreme emotional conditions, the thalamus, hippocampus, and medial prefrontal cortex can stay online during the event and modify learning in the amygdala by adding contextual details to form an explicit memory. That's how most memories work. Explicit memory includes the factual details of the event, the episodic memory, that's where the memory occurs in a timeline in your life, and the autobiographical memory, the cognitive context and meaning of the event. However, in trauma, and this is what I was saying earlier, cortisol and endogenous opioids can interfere with the brain's ability to form explicit memories during extreme stress responses. Thus, sensory cues associated with the traumatic experience stay locked in implicit memory and fail to be integrated with the context and the event at a later time when they are knowledge contained in higher cortical regions. She says, of course, a person might be able to reflect on the event at a later time when they are calm and seem to form an explicit memory of the event. And so later on, someone may be talking about it, and you go, oh yeah, my dad really got mad, and I remember, I got a bruise here, he hit me. So now that becomes an explicit memory because you're remembering something, but you're not remembering, that's not the implicit part of it. The implicit part remembers what he looked like, what he said, what he did, and that's what the brain's going to be looking for, okay? But this explicit memory is not formed during the trauma. It is formed after the trauma when in a calmer state. It is not fully integrated memory formed while in the trauma state. Thus, anytime we encounter, and this is key, anytime we encounter any sensory cues similar to the original event, our emotional brain activates the same extreme emotional response that we had the first time, regardless of what our rational brain is telling us to do. And if you stop to think about it, you've no doubt experienced this. Work can do this. If someone came up to me and put their glasses down, had a clipboard and said, "Ron, I want to talk to you." All of a sudden, I'm not thinking anything good here. I'm not thinking, oh, I'm going to get a raise. I'm thinking, oh, crud, what did I do? Oh, no. Or if someone gets mad at me, oh, my goodness, it would take me hours to get over all the, what am I going to do? The people pleaser in me. Where is that coming from, you see? And a lot of us get tripped up. That's why we're talk about anxiety. But what we want to do is be able to go back and figure out some of this stuff and get better and better at it, right? Now, let's get a little scientific, okay? Let's get to the next page here, and we're going to talk about Bruce Eckert and what he writes, okay? And it gets a little scientific, but that's okay, it won't hurt us, because I think the key points here are really worth it, okay? They're really worth it. In 2004, reconsolidation of memory researchers' early inference that memory reactivation alone disables the memory neural circuits was overturned. And what they're saying here is people for years have been trying to think, what can we do with traumatic memories? I mean, a person in a fire, right? And they can't sleep at night, they keep having reoccurring dreams. What can we do with that kind of memory? And so what used to be believed that if we just recall the memory, it can change it. And so we have all kinds of therapies, where exposure therapy and that. But what they're saying in 2004, they decided that is not true. Just recalling a memory doesn't change it. It just recalls it, okay? So they determined that a critical additional experience must take place while the memory is still reactivated. The second experience consists of a novel perceptions that mismatch. Now this is important, okay? That is, deviate dramatically from what the reactivated target memory expects and predicts, okay? So you have a memory of being, you were young and you almost drowned, okay? I mean, you were under there and man, you couldn't catch your breath and then, but all of a sudden, next thing you know, you wake up and you're okay. But do you think you want to swim? No, okay? So you're afraid of the water. Well, just recalling that memory alone isn't going to change it. What you want to do is when you recall that memory, you have to bring in something that mismatches the expectation. What's the expectation? If I go into the water, I'm going to what? I'm going to drown. We need something that's going to help us think, if I go into the water, I'm not going to drown. You see the mismatch? Okay, the mismatch? And so we would go back into that memory. We would ask you, we would bring in some experts to tell that who we were then, that younger self, that, hey, it's going to be okay. We're not, and so we open the memory, we bring in some evidence that mismatches it, okay? The expectations and what? The predictions. Remember, we talked about predictions, about the way the world functions. The studies have shown that the mismatch can either be a full contradiction and disconfirmation of the memory, or a new, novel, dramatic variation of the target memory. If the target memory is reactivated by familiar cues, sensations, but not mismatched, then the synapses do not unlock and reconsolidation are not induced, okay? So the authors are saying step 1 is going back and remembering a memory. Step 2 is bringing a new knowledge to the memory. This knowledge must contradict the conclusions and predictions made at the time of the memory, but the knowledge must be powerful, convincing, credible, and most of all, believable, okay? And so here again, you can read the rest here. I don't want to go into all of it, but you can read it. I think there's some stuff there. Let's go down to where it says, so we have emotionally learned, okay? So we have emotionally learned the conclusion about ourselves. It's either true or not. Most of the time, because of an immature child concluded, it is an exaggeration or a lie, an unwarranted conclusion. So we need to extinguish that belief by believing another contradictory truth. The goal of emotion resilience is more than the extinction of a memory emotion. Our goal is to have you emotionally relearn the truth. And listen to what Eckhart says here. In each of the studies, the target learning was first disestablished by 2 steps of being reactivated and then mismatched by a novelty or a contradiction, okay? Contradiction. Then in a 3rd step, the target learning was completely or partially rewritten by the new learning. Now these are his words. I've been teaching this for a long time. He came after, right? In 2004 or 5 they were writing this, okay? Or 2011 I think is when he came out. Rewritten by the new learning within the 5-hour reconsolidation window. And so they know that when we open the memory, we got about 5 hours to change it. What's so exciting is that you can help, for example, if you got kids and they're going to school, okay, and they come home and you can see something's wrong with Johnny and you go, Johnny, what's wrong? Well, I don't want to talk about it. No, really, what's wrong? Well, nothing. John, I can tell something wrong. What happened? Well, I was on school and this one kid started pushing me and I pushed him back. We was talking and all of a sudden he said I was an idiot, you know, and other people started laughing at me because I'm short and they said, you know, that I'm no good and all this. And so you go, Johnny, it's horrible. Let me ask you, how'd that feel? Well, I felt horrible, embarrassed. What do you believe? What are you believing about yourself because they said that? Well, you know, I'm really kind of no good. I mean, I'm really kind of, nobody likes me. You know, I'm short and I'm, you know, a dweeb, you know, or whatever he's thinking. Now there, at that moment, you have an opportunity to mismatch. And at that moment, you can look your son in the eye and go, oh, son, that's not true at all. They were probably just saying that because, you know, maybe they were bullied. But here's the truth. You're a wonderful young man. You have a lot of potential. And, you know, God created you and you go on. And what are you doing there? You're taking before he gets it settled. I mean, it's still the 5-hour window, right? You're establishing good thoughts into the memory. And so a lot of times we can do this ahead of the time and stop what we're believing and put it away, put that memory away with a good positive belief. So a lot of times it's good to correct ourselves in the moment. You know, we got that 5-hour window, right? When we're, you know, when a memory is being processed. And even still, if she would have found out about it the next day, she still has a 5-hour window to help recorrect that. Isn't that exciting? And we can do that to ourselves. That's why I had you do the memory jogger. And maybe you didn't get a chance to do that, but just by looking over your life a little bit, there might come up some things. And when we think some of these things and we find out some of these things, we believe we got that 5-hour window to really recorrect it. Really recorrect it. Let me get a little ahead of myself here. I remember once, and I think I've told you this before, I was always afraid of abandonment. Abandonment was a huge issue with me. Either I was going to be sent away to military school or something was going to happen if my parents, somehow I got a fear they were going to die or something. I remember if they went to the same place all the time, very predictable. they'd be gone about 45 minutes. And I remember this one time it was an hour, and I started worrying. It was an hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes. I got out on the front lawn, and I'm starting to pace, and they still weren't back. And I remember there was about an hour and 20 minutes. I started running up the street. I knew they were checkered drugs. I knew that. It's just my family always did the same thing. I started running up the block, and I remember getting about halfway through the block. I thought, what if they come home right now? And they start seeing me, oh, hi, you know. So I turned around and went back home, ran back home before they got home, and sure enough, they finally came. They came back. That fear of abandonment was overwhelming. And I remember thinking about that fear of abandonment in my older life, back when I was started to teach some of this stuff. And I was interested in what could go on here. And so I remember going back to a memory. I was thinking some things, and I said, Lord, you know, is there a memory? Is there something I need to remember here? And I remembered the day my mom came home. And she came into the living room and said, say bye to your dad, you're never going to see him again. And I remember, talk about dissociation, you know, I was off the ground, you know, and I'm thinking, you know, and I remember that. And so that was the memory I chose to work on. And so I sat there and I pictured it. I pictured the living room where everyone was at, where I was at. And I asked Jesus to come into the memory. I said, Jesus, would you come into the memory, Lord, and wherever, just whatever. And I remember in my mind's eye, and I'm not saying this is the Lord, this is what my mind's eye saw. I saw Jesus go to the couch, and I can't tell you what he looked like, it's just whatever, went to the couch and kind of sat back like this with his arm on the couch, real kind of comfortable, you know. And I remember thinking, you know, and about, you know, am I going to be alone? I said, Lord, am I going to, you know, am I going to be abandoned? I'm going to be, you know, and I remember, Jesus, are you going to leave me? And I remember when I said that, Jesus said that to his disciples. All that's going through my mind. And before I could even say anything, this image of Jesus didn't even flinch and said, I ain't going nowhere. And I'm not saying the Lord uses bad English, okay? All right? That's how I talk, okay? And he said it the way I needed to hear it. And that was a very emotional experience. And it was a very powerful experience. And the lesson for me there was, he's not going to leave me or abandon me. And it was in that memory, which was a key memory to my whole abandonment experience. Do you see what I'm saying? Do you see how it makes sense? I don't know what memories God may work with for you. But when we apply some of these things, you may get back to one or two or three. And I've done this with quite a few things when I felt real by the Lord. Help me, I just want to go back to a place where I felt this way before. And I remember one time it was in the backyard when my dad was working on the car, and I remember he was getting very frustrated with me. He's asking me to go get a box wrench, and I didn't. Box wrench, what the heck is a box? I'm looking for a box that looks like, I don't know what in the world. And then it's an open end. That one I might figure out, you know, and all this, but he's getting really frustrated at me, and I can see, and I'm getting mad because I don't like being in a situation where I'm getting in trouble. And so I processed that memory with the Lord and said, Lord, I just believe I'm a klutz. I can't do anything right. What's the truth? What's the truth? And the Lord shared with me what the truth was. I am a klutz. No, he shared with me that I'm loved, that, you know, I may not be a mechanic, but that doesn't have to define me, right? And that my dad was just frustrated, and I didn't know what was going on, and that he's made me the way he's made me, and I'm good enough, okay? And usually the truth isn't hard to figure out. But we need to hear it. We need experience, you see, from something that's credible. We went through this when we were talking about belief exchange. And cognitive processing therapy educates you, first of all, much like I'm trying to do. They educate you on, usually they work with post-traumatic stress disorder, so they talk about that. They talk about traumatic events and how it can impact your feelings And you're asked to write impact statements. How do you think that trauma impacted you? Because you're going there because of a certain trauma. And then they process the trauma. The second phase, individuals asked to write out detailed account of their traumas, much like we did the memory jogger, right? You're kind of thinking of stuff. In this case, they know what the trauma is. You might not know or remember some of the traumas. And so you're kind of jogging your memory. Here they're coming with one. And this is what's important. They involve the patient discussing the meaning of the traumatic experience to identify stuck points or self-blame issues. And that's kind of what we're looking for. What we're looking for in emotional relearning is these beliefs about ourselves. And a lot of these beliefs, and what they're talking about is self-blames. When there's a trauma, a lot of time the question why comes up. Makes sense? Why did this happen? And a lot of times it's blaming myself. There's some self-blame going on. Children always blame themselves. I mean, they don't have the capacity to blame their parents. They blame themselves. It was my fault. I'm no good. Now, these things aren't always out there aware, but they're there emotionally. And so they look at them, and so they help them move beyond the traumatic beliefs. And the therapist then tries to modify these negative thinking patterns by using, questioning. They try to question them and help them see how maybe silly it is to think that way, or how it's not logical to think that way. And therefore, they come to the conclusion sometimes that, and they're getting what? They're mismatching, right, their belief with truth. And so that's phase 3 is they change the beliefs surrounding the traumatic events. And the last sentence says, this focus includes negative beliefs revolving around trust, power, intimacy, and self-esteem. So they identify those stuck points and they start to change the thought patterns. So that's a similar way of doing it. And you can go back and review that lesson that we had on belief exchange. But what we want to talk about now is getting into the integration of neuroscience and cognitive behavior, what we call relearning here. And how do we change the lie that we're emotionally believing? And there's 3 ways that we need to change and emotionally relearn the truth. The first would be to search our heart for what we believe when we're emotionally upset. And you can do that. A lot of times you stop, say, what's going on? What am I feeling? What am I experiencing? You get a hold of the memory and you go, okay, what am I believing? What am I believing here, right? And you recall the emotional moment and ask yourself what you believe that made you feel that way, and you can write it down. The second, I believe if we know Jesus here, let's talk to the Lord about this. The second is to ask Jesus to help us realize, Lord, is there something I'm believing here? Now, in a sense, you're asking yourself that too. And so the Lord can use either your own reflective, or the Lord can intervene and tell you to. Either way, you're stopping with the Lord's help to understand, what am I believing here? A lot of times we don't make that step. We don't spend the time. It takes more than 1 second, okay? It may only take 15, but 15 seems like a lifetime when you don't want to think about something, right? I mean, there's a lot of things our life would be better with if we took a minute to do it, but how many things don't we take a minute to do, right? This may take a minute, it may take a couple, but it's worth it, okay? We want to get to the root. What am I believing here? And we can ask the Lord to reveal some, painful beliefs that we might believe about ourselves. And if you're finding yourself emoting and you're getting upset, you might want to take a few minutes to reflect on that. And the third way to discover an emotionally believed lie is to go to an emotional episode that you're having and have had, and feel it in your body. Then let it take you to a time when you felt that way before. Once you have had the memory, you can process that memory and discover the lie. Now that's key, okay? And that's, now in EMDR, which is a therapy that they use in post-traumatic stress and that, they call it a bridging technique or floating back. And so you float back to a memory that you had before. Well, we wrote this before we discovered that, but they've discovered there's other practices that do this. This isn't an uncommon technique. And so let's go to some of those steps, okay? Steps to ascertaining the lie that you are believing about yourself. One, be aware of the body's sensations or over-emotional moments. There are moments that give you a clue that you are reacting to something more than a single circumstance you're in. They are disproportionate to the situation. You're overreacting. You're really upset. Okay? And when we repress feelings, our body gives off clues that help us know that something is not the way it could be. Clues that remind us to trade our feelings for truth. What are some? Pain, uneasiness, we're getting depressed, agitation, excessive tiredness, anger, being worried, shame, striving, perfectionism, being critical. Something is going on. And that would be a good time to stop and say, okay, what is going on? What am I feeling here? What am I believing? And so, two, you want to ready your mind to receive truth. And when you're ready, you can get into a relaxed position and give the time to God, ask Him for help. What I like to do, first of all, sometimes is ready my mind. I want to think of a joyful experience. So just remember a joy. For me, I just remember my son's dog. We babysat. He was so happy to see me. He put his paws right up here, and I went, "Hey, Rocco, how you doing?" And as soon as I think about that, man, it just lights up my brain. It lights up my brain. And pets can do that, So it might be a pet memory. It might be a certain person. Maybe it was a certain party. Maybe it was a hug you got. But use that to light up that brain, because we're going to go into some memories here, and you want to kind of ready your brain, okay? And plus that turns on the relational circuits in your brain. That joyful time with Jesus or someone else opens up that brain, because we're going to be talking to the Lord here. Because when we get into these things, a lot of times our receptivity is off. Okay, it's off. And we're not ready for any help. We're in it, not to win it, right? We're in it. So by doing this, it turns on those relational circuits. It allows us now to be ready for some interaction with the Lord or whoever we visualize in that. Does that make some sense? Okay, plus it's getting our prefrontal cortex online here. Well, then number 3 is recall a time when you're experiencing a painful emotion or just noticed you were overly emotional. So it could be the episode you just went through, or you're going to think of, last week I had this episode. You want to figure out, you've been having a lot of these episodes and you want to pick one. Okay, you want to pick one. And so you pick one. And now that painful emotion can include uneasiness, depression, agitation, excessive tiredness, all kinds of things. That's okay. Now, as you recall the recent event and emotion, focus on how you felt. Don't stuff the feelings, okay? Instead, let them permeate your body. You want to sense them and feel them. Now, when you have the emotional feeling, hold on to it, let it take you to a time when you were younger and felt the same way. Now, if you're thinking of something which was very terrifying, remember you're your own observer here. You don't have to go into it. When I first was working on elevator phobia things, what they had me do is think of a time when I was in front of an elevator, and what did it feel like? Well, I was able to get in touch with that without having the full terror of claustrophobia, right? All I needed was that beginning part. That I just needed to activate what was going on. I didn't need to get into the sheer terror or whatever was stopping me from getting on an elevator, you see. And what that does then, there's like a fingerprint to that, if you will. It allows you to really be ready to recall another time when you experienced that. Because what we want to do is we want to see, is there anything back there? Is there anything that happened that might have set this off? And so we recall the memory, we observe ourselves, and then we relax and recall memory when we felt the same way. And so what I do sometimes, I say, Lord, help me go to a place. Now, He's not going to take me to a place I don't want to go, all right? It's not like that. I have to be willing, right? But if I'm into it and I really want some change and I'm feeling this emotion, then go back to place where I felt that before. Like I said, in EMDR, they call it floating back. Well, this stuff really does work. Have you ever been down, you go to a bakery and all of a sudden you smell something, you go, man, that's just like my grandma's pie she used to cook. Or you hear a certain song and all of a sudden you're back at the junior high dance or stuff. There are things that happen that will allow us to go back. They trigger memories, right? And that's kind of what we're doing. And the way we feel in a certain way, there's like a signature, a fingerprint in a sense, and it will take us back to other times. For example, you had a mild panic attack at work when the boss accused you of not doing the project he gave you to his satisfaction. You were ruminating on it on your way home. Now, if you came to me with that, I would ask you to go back to the time in the office in your mind. Where were you in the room? Where's your boss? Were you sitting or standing? What's your posture? What were you feeling when he said that? Where in your body were you feeling it? I would then ask you to hold on to that body sensation. Feel it, and then let it take you back to a time when you felt that way before. You don't have to fight it. Hang on to the sensation. Just let your body take you back to a memory. And many times it will. Not all the time, but many times it will. It may take you to several, and you just want to write them down. This way you can recall it later. Don't think that you don't need to write it down, because I've had this where I thought of something and then all of a sudden I try to remember it later and it's not there. It was a fragment and I thought I'd remember it, but I didn't. And so a lot of times it helps just to write it down. And then you can come back to it later if you will. You'll be surprised how fleeting sometimes they are. I'm in the middle of the night sometimes, I'm thinking of it, and then I have a pad next to me, so I write down things when I wake up from things and think of things. And so, and like I say here, we can remember, when you hear someone yelling at their child, has it ever taken you to a time when you remember being yelled at? I mean, these kind of things can trigger us. So when you recall a memory where you felt the same way in your recent incident, take a deep breath, relax, and make the recollection vivid. Bring in the colors, the textures, the sounds and smells. Be your own observer. Slow it down. You're not going to get hurt. You're not in it. You're watching it. And so then you can go to number 6 here. What are you thinking about yourself in the memory? Now that you have a sense of what's going on, you're back to a memory where you felt that way, much like I did, right? When I was, my mom said, hey, say bye to your dad, you're never going to see him again. I brought in the vividness of it. I wasn't, it didn't tear me up. I didn't go back into the same emotion I had. I was kind of observing it, right? I had the butterfly kind of feeling. I knew what was going on, but I didn't have the same emotional panic that I did because I was observing it, right? And so I was able, though, to ask myself, what was I believing in that? And I was believing I was going to be alone. I was believing that, what am I going to do now? If I would have known at that time, I would have said, I'm going to die. But, we don't always think that way. It's that horrible, horrific feeling, okay? And so you can ask yourself, what do I believe about myself in a memory? Why was I feeling that way? If you were afraid, or sad, why? And so you try to, why might help you answer why you're feeling that way. Remember, if you were a child, you looked at the situation through childish, immature thinking. It's the interpretation of the memory that's stuck with you. So when the right circumstances happen, that childish, immature conclusions rise up again and send you into the same emotion that you were feeling then. And that's what we want to kind of discover. What conclusions did I come up with? What was I believing? And that's what you're trying to discover. And here's the key. The emotion is coming from the belief and the consequence of that belief, and we've talked about that quite a few times. It may be something that you don't want to admit, like I'm unlovable. It may be painful, but remember, you're an observer. So go ahead and have the you in the memory, right? Tell you what they feel and the consequence. and you can write it down. But a lot of times that happens so fast. That happens so fast. The real key is what's the truth? What's the truth? You don't need to dwell on so much what the negative is. You want to kind of get a hold of it, and it might not be even a full sentence, but the question is, what's the truth? I was able to get in that one, get to the place where I felt as abandoned, and I said, Lord, are you going to leave me, right? Am I going to be totally abandoned? That was the question I came up with. The emotion is coming from the belief in a consequence. It may be something that you don't want to admit, like I'm unlovable, but we can go through it. And then number 7 is, now that you know what you're believing, you want to search for the truth. And here again, what we're looking for is an emotional truth. If the lie you believe about yourself had its genesis in an incident when you were young, then the young mind interpreted the event. The logical part of the prefrontal cortex didn't come online till about 12 years old, so you're not going to be real logical. The truth has come from someone or somewhere with an emotional awareness, okay, and that's what we need, a new truth. And so we need to go back to the memory, invite someone, our wiser self, God, someone grandma, whatever. We need something to tell us what the truth is. And a lot of times it may just be, okay, what's the truth? And we may come up with it. We can ask the Lord. He can help us. And so what we need is something credible and believable and convince us of the truth. It needs to be credible, believable, and spoken with authority. And the way we have it, different ways of working with the memory, and I have them written down here. One is change your what. A lot of times it's what. When we were abused in that young age, and we keep going back to that, we've never grown up. We don't see ourselves as an older person now. And so we need to change the what. It isn't over. Our brain stopped from fully processing. We bought into a conclusion based on that time in our life. But the truth is, we've lived since then. We're different now. We're more powerful now. God has worked in our heart. And so who are we now? As an adult, we think differently now. And so we're able to bring now a conclusion about who we are now. We're past that point. And so what are we now? What's the truth about me now, Lord? And he's given you strengths. He's given you a lot of things that you can call upon. And the truth would be, I'm resilient at this point, or whatever it is that comes up to your mind. But sometimes we need to remember we're not there anymore. We're here now. And we need to get in touch with the new possibilities. Sometimes it's changing our why. Like we said, so many times we get stuck on why did something happen, and it's self-blame in there. And a lot of times we need to come to the truth and find out it wasn't our fault. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with people and they find out as we're going through it that, well, it wasn't my fault. Now before that, you try to tell them something different. They say, oh no, you don't know how I was. I deserve that. Well, no child deserves what you went through, okay? But oh no, you don't know how bad I was. Or she was just having a bad day, and on and on and on, until finally we can get to the place where we can change our why. Listen, I don't know why she did it maybe, but I know I'm not to blame anymore. I know it wasn't my fault. I was a child. I didn't know it. I made a mistake. Mistakes happen. You see how simple little things like that can change everything. It seems logical. We should have thought of that 20 years ago. But that isn't how it always works. We need to take time to come to some of these logical things that make sense. And when we're doing it in that memory, then all of a sudden, oh, I get it. That wasn't my fault. And that can become quite a huge aha. And what I was believing about myself can really change. And then, like I said, sometimes changing the beliefs about who we are. And so we've got new evidence we can figure out from. So I got a chart here you can look at, right? Where I have a false belief. And so it could be it's my fault. The realistic circumstance, I was a child, they were an adult. Credible witness might be, my mature self. Second witness might be my grandmother. So I bring my grandmother into it. Grandma, what do you think? And she loved me and everything. And she, the new behavioral evidence is I was young and naive. Another one was I was powerless. And so what's the new belief? Well, it wasn't my fault. It may be a false belief I'm no good. And the realistic circumstantial evidence is I was a child. I didn't know what was wrong, what I did. Credible witness would be Jesus, so I'm talking to him. And second is my mature self. And what I might come out with, evidence, is I was coerced or I was threatened. And the new belief after all that is what? I am good enough. I am good enough. Now spiritually, like I said earlier, and I've kind of talked about this, we may want to go deeper, and that's why I like to bring the Lord into it and talk to him and talk about it with the Lord. And I believe that God deeply cares about the truth, that he wants us to know the truth about who we are. And it's a deeply spiritual thing, and God loves you and he knows the truth about you, and when you invite him to share truth with you, it's not time to rush. You can wait and let the Lord speak to your heart. And and it's emotional, it's believable, and so you can invite Jesus. And number 9, you can invite Jesus to come into the memory or come into your recollection. You might just say, Lord, what lies am I believing? You might not even have a memory. You just may be feeling an emotion right now. You say, Lord, help me. What am I believing? What's the truth? And so you ask the Lord for the truth. And it comes in different ways sometimes. Sometimes you hear something from the Lord. Sometimes you remember Scripture. Sometimes you just have a certain peace. And so, it's important. It's deeply spiritual. God loves you. He wants you to experience the truth. And so you can allow him to minister to you. You can wait on him. You can say, Lord Jesus, what do you want to tell me about this memory? Share truth with me, Lord. You talk to him. Now, it's different for different people, okay? And, a thought that reveals the truth. Some people get an image. Some people think of a scripture verse. Some imagine Jesus is speaking to them. Remember, all truth is God's truth here. And how he delivers is as different as we are from each other. And what I put in here, at the ending here, is what Leanne Payne wrote. And I brought that out a couple weeks ago when we were talking about God Talk. But I thought it would go good here again. And she talks about, don't be afraid of what you hear is just me. You need to know what just me, that is, your deep heart knows. Within a short time, you'll be able to discern the difference between knowledge you already have, right? I mean, we have, deep down, we know what the truth is. We just need to experience it, right? And contradict the lies. But on the other hand, you'll discern between the knowledge you already have, the wisdom already given you and a part of your heart, and the word God speaks to you afresh. Both are important and needful, okay? And she explains a little bit about that. She says, don't try to force it. Just allow time and space for God to speak. We will learn both how and easily and wonderfully the word comes and the different ways it comes. Now, I put a paragraph in there. Of course, we need to use discernment, right? Certainly, any truth you receive must not contradict scriptures. It will not lead you to any immoral or non-Christian behavior. It will feel true, it will make sense, and you can share it with other mature spiritual people, and they'll help make sense as well. So there are safeguards here. And then, 10, you can ask your more mature self to explain it to your younger self. There's ways to do that. I remember talking to my younger self and explaining what was going on and just the ease. And I remember doing that. And then at night, I had processed the memory. And that night, it was around 4:30, I think, and I was sleeping, and I was in a waterbed. And we had a California King waterbed. It was like an ocean. And I remember we'd have all three of my boys, my wife and I in bed, none of us touching. It was huge, and it was warm. All the kids liked it. And I remember dreaming that I was in that bed, and that younger Ron came up to that bed and said, can I come in bed? And I remember laying there at 4:30 in the morning on a different bed in my bedroom and just taking little me and just kind of going like this, it's okay. And I was able to just take that part that had all these worries and fears and just be able to bring that into myself. It wasn't that much longer because, you know, as I'm writing this stuff, I'm working on it myself, that I had a memory as a teenager. And doggone if that night, in the middle of the night again, teenage Ronnie came. He had a colic, remember? No, anyways, he came in, starting to bawl. No, but anyways, he came up to me. He said, and now I'm feeling like a little weird, you know, but I remember taking teenage Ron, because I had some struggles at home as a teenager, and I remember taking him and just kind of, hey, it was a little bigger, you know, it's going to be okay. But that was a real healing moment, that bringing that into, because we want to mature those parts of us that are stuck. Now, it may not work that way with you, and that's okay. But we want to be open to the fact that we want to heal ourselves. We want to be healed. We want to be whole. We want to bring maturity. We want those parts that are immature to come up and mature, okay? And so I have in the end here some ways that you can establish it. You can, you know, repeat the new belief out loud, you know, until it becomes a reality. When you learn new truth, you know, it might be, it wasn't my fault. Hey, I'm good enough. You know, whatever it is, but really start. You know, you want to meditate on it, visualize yourself living it, find healthy relationships that will help you affirm it. What's the Bible have to say? Learn scripture that affirm it. There's a lot of things you can do, okay? And I've got some written. And then I have there's some Christian programs that teach some similar things to this, and I've got some different therapies as well. So that's kind of the conclusion of what we've been talking about here in emotional relearning today and what we've done in anxiety. I invite you to come back on the 21st. When we start the class, we'll be going into a lot of this in more detail. I hope that this is kind of wet your whistle a little bit, that there's things you can do. The main thing is that when you feel anxious, what are you thinking? What are you believing? What's the truth? Learn to regulate the emotions, but get behind it a little bit and start believing the truth and figure out what's bothering you, and let's correct some of those lies that keep us in our anxiety, okay? All right, let's pray. Father, I thank you, Lord, for bringing us together. I thank you, Lord, for this series that we could do. I pray that we would be able to work on our own selves. Lord, that we would invite you to speak to us, to bring truth to us, to help us correct some of these beliefs that have trapped us and have hounded us and have caused anxiety in our life. Father, might we know the truth, and might it set us free. Teach us, help us, Father, we pray in your name. Amen. Amen.